What if the most powerful person in the room was the one who said nothing at all? Most people think power comes from visibility, from being seen, heard, praised. But that's the first illusion. In reality, those who speak the loudest are often the weakest. True influence. It's quiet, it's calculated, it's invisible. Years ago, there was a man who walked into corporate boardrooms and said almost nothing. No titles, no flexing, no demands. People didn't know his role, but they watched him. When he raised an eyebrow, others paused. When he stood up, people adjusted their behavior. He didn't chase attention, he controlled it. You see, modern power doesn't roar. It whispers. It doesn't argue to win. It lets others exhaust themselves trying to figure it out. While everyone else is speaking, explaining, defending, the real strategist waits, watches, times his silence like a blade. That man was later revealed to be the architect behind every decision in the company. The CEO spoke publicly, but the man in the shadows had the final say. He didn't build influence by asking for it. He built it by becoming the gravity everyone else unconsciously revolved around. Because in today's world, attention is currency, and the more you spend it, the cheaper it becomes. But the one who holds back, who resists the need to be seen, becomes unforgettable. So the next time you feel the urge to prove your presence, try disappearing instead. Silence, when used right, doesn't erase you. It immortalizes you. What if the most dangerous idea wasn't shouted into your face, but whispered into your mind before you ever realized it? Most people try to influence by force. They argue, push, insist. But that's surface level. It's noisy, and it almost never works. Machiavelli understood something deeper, something most people never see coming. If you want to control someone, you don't start with their actions. You start with their thoughts. There was once a strategist who never told people what to do. He didn't issue commands or force decisions. Instead, he planted tiny ideas, harmless at first. He'd casually say something like, "It's strange how confident people always seem to move fast, isn't it?" Then he'd walk away. Days later, that seed would bloom. Someone facing a tough choice would suddenly feel pressure to act quickly. They wouldn't even realize why. They'd just feel it because now, waiting made them feel insecure. The thought felt like their own. But it wasn't. It was planted. This is how true manipulation begins. Not through pressure, but through suggestion. Not by yelling, but by inserting thoughts that reshape behavior from the inside out. Most people don't realize how vulnerable the human mind is. We think we make decisions logically, but in truth, we're driven by internal narratives, stories we've absorbed without question. And the right manipulator knows exactly how to edit those stories without being noticed. They don't convince you, they make you convince yourself. That's the genius of it. The moment someone believes a behavior is their idea, they defend it, they repeat it, they commit to it. You didn't just influence them, you rewired them. And that's the level where power becomes permanent. Because once you live inside someone's thought process, they can never quite get rid of you. They begin to filter their choices through the lens you gave them. Would he approve? What would she do in this situation? This is how you stop reacting and start directing, quietly, from the shadows. So if you want real influence, stop trying to control behavior. Control the narrative. Plant the thought. Disappear. Let the seed grow. By the time they realize what happened, it won't matter anymore, because the idea has already become a part of them. What if the friendliest smile you've ever seen was just a disguise for control? We like to believe charm is honest. That warmth means safety, that when someone smiles, compliments us, makes us feel seen, it's genuine. But that's exactly why it works, because charm isn't always authenticity. Sometimes it's strategy. The most skilled manipulators don't come across as dangerous. They don't speak with harshness or move with force. They speak softly. They listen intently. They wear warmth like a carefully tailored suit. Not because they feel it, but because you do. Imagine this. You're in a room. Someone walks in. They're gracious. They laugh at the right moments. They nod as you speak. They compliment you just enough to feel special, but not too much to seem fake. You relax, you open up, you trust. But here's the catch. None of it was real. This person has learned that coldness is suspicious, that direct power triggers resistance. But charm lowers the drawbridge. It invites you to let your guard down willingly. And once you feel safe, they move in. Not with commands, not with pressure, but with a single sentence, a suggestion, a slight redirection, a phrase that plants itself in your mind like it belongs there. You don't feel manipulated. You feel understood. That's the brilliance. Because while the world tries to dominate through force, the Machiavellian mind dominates through comfort. It's not about being nice, it's about being perceived as safe until it's time to strike. By then, you've already opened the door. They don't need to push. You've already stepped closer. You've already shared too much, trusted too fast, revealed your blind spots because charm made it feel natural. And that's where precision begins. The master manipulator doesn't wear a mask of cruelty. They wear a mask of kindness. And they wear it well, not to inspire, but to disarm. Because when someone disarms you emotionally, they don't need to overpower you physically. You've already surrendered the high ground. So the next time someone feels a little too perfect, a little too aligned, ask yourself, is this connection real or rehearsed? Because in the game of influence, the most dangerous person is the one who makes you feel the safest. What if the person who made you feel the safest was also the one who made you fall apart? Emotional control doesn't start with chaos. It starts with consistency. It starts with reliability, kindness, warmth. You become predictable, always responding, always available, always calm. You train them to feel secure in your presence. They begin to rely on you not just for support, but for emotional stability. You become the calm in their storm, the clarity in their noise. They know how you'll react, and that's exactly the point, because predictability builds trust. But trust is only the first stage. The real control begins the moment you break that pattern. One day, you don't reply as quickly. Your tone is colder. Your words are shorter. You give no explanation, just distance. Now they panic. Not because you said something cruel, but because you didn't act like yourself, or rather, the version of you they got used to. That sudden shift, that subtle change creates emotional imbalance. And imbalance makes people chase. They lean in, wondering what changed. They overthink. They replay conversations. They ask themselves what they did wrong. And slowly they start to work harder to regain a version of you that never fully existed. This is not manipulation through aggression. This is surgical power, a calculated disruption of emotional rhythm. Because people don't fear what they understand. They fear what they can't predict. And fear in its rawest form becomes submission disguised as love. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to explain. All you need to do is become unfamiliar. Suddenly, they're no longer acting from logic. They're reacting from anxiety. And that anxiety drives attachment, not to who you are, but to who they thought you were. The mind clings to familiarity, and when you pull it away, they try harder. Speak softer. Bend more. And in that bending, you take control. This isn't cruelty, it's strategy. You gave them safety, then removed it just long enough to make them chase it again. Because the most powerful influence doesn't force anyone to stay. It makes them afraid to lose you. So if you ever want to own someone's focus, don't ask for it. Earn their trust. Break the rhythm. Then watch what happens next. What happens when the one person who made you feel safe suddenly disappears? We're wired to crave what feels rare, to chase what feels just out of reach, and nothing is more intoxicating than a presence we once depended on that now feels absent. At first, you give generously, not everything but enough to set yourself apart. You provide clarity when others are confused. You show up calmly when everyone else is chaotic. You solve problems no one else even notices. You become a quiet anchor in their storm, and they begin to rely on you, not in desperation yet, but in preference, because no one else gives them that level of understanding, that calm assurance, that emotional shelter. You're not loud, you're not flashy, but you're there, predictable, safe, constant. That's when it happens. You pull away, not with malice, not with drama, just space. You stop responding right away. You show less warmth. You let the silence stretch. They wonder if you're busy. Then they wonder if it's them. They don't say it out loud, but the silence is deafening. And in that void, you become larger than ever. This is the power of scarcity. Not just being gone, but being felt in your absence. Because now they don't just miss you, they question their own stability without you. Scarcity reframes everything. What once felt casual now feels irreplaceable. What once seemed easy now feels earned. The connection becomes a privilege, and you once accessible are now an emotional necessity. They begin to reshape their behavior around the hope of regaining access. They become more agreeable, more careful, more attentive. Not because you ask them to, but because your distance exposed their dependency. And here's the brilliance. You never had to demand attention. You just made your presence valuable, then stepped back and let the absence do the talking. Because influence doesn't come from force. It comes from creating a void that only you can fill. So if you want to control someone's focus, don't give more, give less. Show up when no one else can. Then leave just enough mystery behind when you go. That gap between what they once had and what they can no longer access, that's where your power begins. What if the thing that keeps people thinking about you is the part they never understood? Most people try to gain attention by being clear, loud, and obvious. They explain themselves, they overshare, they want to be known. But Machiavelli would do the opposite. He knew that certainty is safe, but ambiguity is addictive. When people know what you want, what you feel, what you mean, there's nothing left to chase. But the moment you become unreadable, the moment your motives don't add up, the game begins. Because the mind cannot rest in confusion, it must solve it. Imagine someone who's warm one day, distant the next. They smile at you, then avoid your eyes. They give you insight into their mind, just enough to hook you, but never enough to truly understand them. You don't know where you stand. You don't know what they're thinking. And that not knowing becomes a mental itch you can't stop scratching. This is how obsession forms. Ambiguity creates open loops in the brain. And the brain hates open loops. It starts writing stories to fill in the gaps, guessing, overanalyzing, replaying every word, every pause, every subtle change in tone. You become the puzzle they can't solve. And here's the brilliance, you're not doing anything dramatic. You're simply withholding clarity. You don't explain your silence. You don't justify your distance. You say just enough to be intriguing, never enough to be fully understood. Why? Because once they understand you, they can move on. But as long as they're confused, they keep coming back trying to decode you, define you, own the version of you in their head. And if you're smart, they never will. Because obsession doesn't form when someone has answers. It forms when they keep asking questions you never intend to answer. That's the secret of powerful influence. It's not loud, it's unresolved. So stop trying to be fully known. Be a contradiction, be clear then vague, present then absent, supportive then silent. Make them feel like there's always something just beneath the surface, something they haven't figured out yet. Because the moment they feel certain about you, they stop looking for you. But when you live in that space between who you are and what they imagine, you don't just get attention, you live rent-free in their mind. What if people don't remember what you said, but never forget how you made them feel? Facts fade, words get lost, timelines blur, but emotion, real, raw, unforgettable emotion burns itself into memory. That's why Machiavelli wouldn't waste energy trying to convince, explain, or argue. He'd go straight to the core, straight to feeling. Because people don't follow logic, they follow impact. And they always return to the place or the person that made them feel something no one else could. Imagine this. You're in a moment of doubt, overlooked, unseen. And someone walks in not to give advice, not to solve your problem, but simply to make you feel understood. They say one sentence, "You're smarter than you let people see." That line hits deeper than any lecture. Not because it's true or false, but because it reflects something you wanted to believe, but never dared to. Now, every time you feel overlooked, you think of that moment, that voice, that presence. You don't remember everything they said, but you remember how you felt when they said it empowered, recognized, alive. That's emotional imprinting. It's not manipulation in the way most people understand. It's branding the soul. It's knowing that you can carve your identity into someone's emotional memory without needing to stay. Because when the moment passes and you're gone, they'll crave the version of themselves they felt in your presence. Not because you demanded their attention, but because you awakened something in them. This is why average influencers fail. They try to be loud, informative, impressive. But no one returns to what's merely smart. People return to what made them feel seen. So don't try to prove a point. Don't try to be right. Be felt. Say one thing that speaks to the version of them no one else acknowledges. Deliver it without ego. Then leave. Because when someone feels uniquely understood by you, they remember you. And when they remember you in moments of silence, insecurity, or victory, you've won. You've become a reference point, not just for thought, but for identity. And once your presence is tied to their emotional rise, you don't need to persuade them again. They'll come back because you became a part of their story. What if the fastest way to earn someone's trust is to reflect the parts of them they've never shown anyone? Most people walk through life wearing a mask, polished, acceptable, safe. They show the world what it wants to see: confidence, kindness, composure. But underneath that mask, there's fear, anger, insecurity, ambition, resentment, the parts they've buried deep to survive. And that's where the real connection happens. See, most people try to win trust by being likable, agreeable, moral. But that only connects to someone's public self. It never touches the shadow, the version of them they try to hide even from themselves. Machiavelli would never appeal to someone's virtue. He would go straight to their darkness. Because once someone feels like you see their shadow and you don't flinch, you become the only person who feels real to them. Imagine telling someone, "You don't trust easily. I don't either." Or saying, "You've been underestimated your whole life. I can see it in your silence." These aren't compliments. They're invitations. Signals that you see through the mask, and more importantly, you respect what's behind it. Suddenly, you're not just someone they talk to. You're the only person who gets them. This creates a kind of intimacy most relationships never reach. Because it's not built on flattery, it's built on recognition. You're not praising who they pretend to be. You're accepting who they really are. And people will follow, protect, and crave the one person who sees them without judgment. But here's the key: you don't stay in that darkness with them. You offer a bridge. You guide them out, not with force, not with advice, but with quiet understanding. You become the solution to the part of them they thought was unlovable. And once you do that, they won't leave, even if you hurt them, even if you pull away, even if your presence disappears, because your impact was never on the surface. It was embedded in the most vulnerable place they had. That's not just influence. That's emotional ownership. So if you want to gain real power, don't flatter someone's ego. Acknowledge their shadow. Speak to the part no one else sees. Make them feel understood where they're most afraid to be seen. Because when someone feels safe in their darkness with you, they'll never stop chasing your light. What if the words that haunt someone the most don't sting in the moment, but weeks later when they're alone with the silence? Most people speak to get a reaction right now. They argue to win the moment. They explain to be understood. But Machiavelli wouldn't speak to resolve the present. He'd speak to own the future. He knew that true influence isn't measured in applause, it's measured in echoes, in the words that resurface at midnight, in the phrases that make someone stop mid-sentence and rethink their next move, in the voice that lives in their mind long after you're gone. Because when you speak like everyone else, you become forgettable. But when you craft words that linger, that feel unfinished, unresolved, quietly prophetic, you become unforgettable. Imagine saying something like, "You're going to realize one day why I stayed silent." Or, "I hope when the truth hits you, you remember this moment." In that instant, they may feel nothing, confused maybe, but not hurt. Not yet. Then something happens. A mistake, a betrayal, a turning point. And suddenly your words return not as advice, but as prophecy. Now, they don't just hear you, they feel like you predicted them. And people follow those who feel like they see what's coming. This is why silence is more powerful than explanation. Because when you don't resolve a moment, you extend its life. You leave behind an emotional question that time itself will answer. And once someone feels like your voice understands them better than they understand themselves, they obey it. Not out of fear, but out of belief. You don't need to repeat yourself. You don't need to correct them. You simply plant the echo and wait, because echoes grow louder when the world gets quieter. When the noise fades, your voice remains. That's how you become a standard, a reference point, a ghost in their decision-making, not through force, but through timeless phrasing that stings in hindsight. So next time you speak, don't speak to win the moment. Speak to shape the next one. Say something that haunts, not teaches. Something that won't be understood until it's too late. Because the most powerful thing you can say is the thing they'll still be thinking about long after you're gone. What if the most powerful person in the room was the one who never asked for anything, but still got everything? Most people crave recognition. They want credit. They want the world to know they're in control. But Machiavelli would warn, the moment they see your hand, they know how to stop it. Real power doesn't come from being named the leader. It comes from guiding others so subtly that they believe they're leading themselves. Imagine this. In a heated meeting, people argue posture, try to dominate. One person sits quietly listening. Occasionally they nod. They ask one well-timed question. They offer a single observation, not a directive, not a command. By the end, the room moves in the direction they suggested, not because they demanded it, but because the others believed it was their idea. That's the art of invisible influence. You don't push, you nudge. You don't command, you suggest. You don't control the outcome through pressure, you control it through perception. This is how Machiavellian influence works. You make people feel brilliant, capable, autonomous. You agree more than you challenge. You let them speak more than you do. And while they feel powerful, heard, in charge, you quietly steer the ship from beneath the surface. They feel in control, but they're really walking your path. And here's where it becomes permanent. When they succeed, they associate their progress with your presence. They don't even realize it, but they start seeking your approval, your insight, your rhythm, because somehow things just go better when you're around. You didn't fight for authority. You became essential without being obvious. That's the highest form of control, when people begin to protect your influence themselves. They speak in ways they think you'd approve. They defend your silence. They follow your unspoken lead, all without you ever having to take credit. And that's the brilliance. Once they believe it was always their choice, they'll never question your direction. So stop trying to be seen as the mastermind. Let others wear the crown. You wear the strings. You don't need applause. You need alignment. You don't want recognition. You want obedience born from belief. Because when people act on your influence, but believe it came from within, they won't just follow you. They'll fight to keep you near. What if the most unforgettable stories were the ones that never ended? Most people rush to complete the conversation. They want closure, certainty, a clean ending. But that's a mistake, because closure ends curiosity. And curiosity is where your power lives. Machiavelli would never give someone a full explanation. He'd give them just enough to keep their minds spinning. He understood something most people never will. People don't obsess over what's finished. They obsess over what's unresolved. Think about it. Someone leaves you mid-conversation saying, "There's more I could say, but I won't." Or they end a message with, "This isn't the time, but you'll understand one day." You don't forget that. You replay it again and again. You search for meaning. You wonder what they meant. You look for signs in everything that followed. That unfinished sentence becomes a mental cliffhanger, and your brain keeps trying to fill in the blank, because the mind craves resolution. But if you hold it back just long enough, it doesn't bring frustration. It creates obsession. This is how you embed yourself in someone's thoughts without ever needing to be present. Not by being loud or dominant, but by becoming the question they can't stop asking. So you learn to leave gaps. You don't reply too quickly. You walk away when they expect a conclusion. You keep the door slightly open, but never wide enough for them to step through. And what happens next is inevitable. They start chasing the ending you never gave them. They lean in. They overanalyze. They make decisions shaped by your silence. Because now you're no longer just a person, they've made you into a riddle. A puzzle with emotional consequences. And the more they think about you, the more they reshape themselves to fit the version of you they imagine. That's how legacy is built, not by speaking louder, but by becoming the presence that lingers after the room is empty. So, resist the urge to finish every sentence. Let people sit in the tension. Let them wonder. Because when you become the story they can't finish, you also become the one they can't forget. And the most haunting power is not in what you say, it's in what you almost said. What if your presence didn't have to be constant, because your absence did all the work? Most people think control is about proximity, being there, speaking often, staying involved. But Machiavelli knew better. True manipulation doesn't require presence. It only requires internalization. It begins quietly. You were once consistent. You responded quickly. You offered clarity, insight, even comfort. They got used to you so much so that your behavior became their emotional baseline. You became the rhythm they moved to, the voice they anticipated, the presence they depended on even if they never admitted it. Then, without warning, you stepped back, not with punishment, not with anger, just absence. Suddenly the rhythm is off. Your replies are slower. Your tone is colder. You don't give explanations. You don't correct. You simply disrupt the pattern. And now they're left with a question. Did I do something wrong? Did something change? Was it me? That question isn't about you. It's about them, and that's where the power begins. They start overcompensating. They soften their tone. They speak more carefully. They offer more than you ask for. They try to win back a version of you they imagined, not realizing that version was never real. It was designed. And the more they adjust to keep you close, the more they internalize your gaze. Now, they don't just respond to you, they respond to what you might think. They mirror your tone. They predict your reactions. They live under a presence that no longer speaks, but still controls. You don't ask for anything. You don't issue commands, but they change anyway. Why? Because they've started acting not from instinct, but from your invisible standard. That's the final stage of influence, when your absence becomes more powerful than your presence. When Piapid it in real time. They don't call it fear, they call but its submission dressed as loyalty. And here's the genius. You didn't demand anything, you just be. Because when your silence becomes the loudest voice in the room, you a person and a system, What if people didn't follow you out of love, but because they feared losing the version of themselves they became around you? Loyalty is often misunderstood. People think it's about honor, about mutual respect, about shared values. But real loyalty, the kind that lasts, that bends behavior, that overrides logic, isn't rooted in virtue, it's rooted in guilt. Machiavelli knew that people don't just fear punishment, they fear disappointment. They fear losing emotional favor. And when someone feels like they've failed you, even if you never say it, they begin to reshape themselves to win you back. That's where control takes hold. You don't accuse, you don't lash out, you simply become distant, a little colder, a little quieter. You delay your replies, you don't give them the feedback they've grown addicted to, and suddenly they feel it. Something's off. They feel unsure. They question everything. Did I say something wrong? Did I overstep? Did I let them down? That self-doubt becomes self-discipline. They begin to censor their words, rework their tone, anticipate your moods. They betray their own boundaries, not because you demanded it, but because guilt whispered that they might have lost your respect. And the deeper that guilt runs, the more loyal they become. Not out of joy, but out of need. Not because you asked for loyalty, but because they volunteered submission. The brilliant twist. They call it growth. They say, you made them better, more self-aware, more in control. But the truth is they're not growing. They're performing, constantly, silently. In the background of every word, every action is the fear of losing you again. And that fear reshapes everything. Now, you don't need to issue rules. They enforce their own. You don't need to correct tongue. They correct themselves. You've created a loop of invisible accountability, and they're grateful for it. This is how Machiavelli would lead, not through threats, not through praise, but through internal praise. Because guilt bonds deeper than affection. It keeps people close even when they know they should walk away. And once someone compromises their values for you, once they lie for you, protect you, or betray someone else to stay in your good, not because you forced them, because losing you would mean facing what they became to keep why, and no one wants to. In a world, you don't need to dominate conversations to control them. You don't need to explain yourself to be respected. Influence isn't about presence, it's about imprint. When why? The lesson. Don't rush to be understood. Let people lean in. Don't force connections. Let your absence reeve. Don't seek loyalty. Let us use silence. Because the most powerful force isn't control by force, it's when others reshape their behavior around your energy. You don't need to be everywhere, you just need to be the one they can.